This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. My guest today is Robert Miller. Robert is the VP of Growth at Fuse, which advertises itself as the most business and consumer-friendly blockchain for mainstream adoption of Web3 and Web3 payments. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you, Andy.
So yeah, just before we get into Fuse, Web3 payments, all that good stuff, we'll do what we do at the beginning of the show, Robert. I'll invite you to please introduce yourself. I'd love to just learn a little bit about your personal story and background. What have you been doing in the lead up to getting involved with the Fuse team?
Yeah, with pleasure. So yeah, I'm from the UK, as you might be able to tell from my accent. My interests really growing up when I was younger were languages and music. I'm actually calling in from the south of France here, Biarritz in the south of France. So I studied French at university. Music came back later in life. It was just a passion of mine when I was very young, and then came back later in my mid-20s. I was living in Paris in the early 2010s, got into a large tech firm. Back then we were selling licenses, right? So it wasn't even SaaS back in 2011, working for a large multinational selling software, but in the form of licenses, so human resource technology, working out of the French office of a large American firm selling into the French market, and loved it. Worked there for 2 years. At the time was sort of, became fascinated by Web2, right? So seeing the likes of Facebook listing at the time, Twitter listing, spending lots of time on Bloomberg, and sort of becoming, very interested in the world of Web2 and wanted to get into the world of startups. And in 2013, I went to work for what has now become a better-known company, a well-known company, a company called Trustpilot. They IPO'd on the London Stock Exchange a couple of years ago at a $1 billion+ valuation. And then it was during that time in 2014 that I came across Bitcoin. A good friend of mine at the time, Dan Richardson, introduced many of us to Bitcoin, and went around the office back then and said, we're putting a small fund together. So I threw £1,000 into this fund, essentially this mini friends fund, and we invested in some altcoins, and sort of from there slowly but surely started to fall down the rabbit hole. And it was the first time that I'd ever really owned a sort of a paper asset, if you like. I hadn't owned equity at the time, and it was really interesting because of course I was working in the startup space, but this was the first sort of ownership that I'd become accustomed to. So I sort of fell down the rabbit hole. And then a couple of years later, in 2016, whilst transitioning out of another sort of SaaS role, another Web2 role, I sort of made it my mission then, and the markets were heating up. So I made it my mission to get into what was then more commonly known as blockchain. And in 2017, I partnered with a fintech, essentially, a company that was focused on building banks, right? So a sort of a fintech type bank for small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I came in with the crypto element. By that point, I'd done lots of research on crypto, considered myself an early stage sort of expert, and we partnered together to sort of mix blockchain and banking. So the project was, blockchain meets banking, a project called Mones. We actually partnered at the time with a lesser known blockchain ecosystem called Komodo platform. So we didn't go down the Ethereum route. And then since then, I spent some time working with Cointelegraph in 2019. And then I've now been with Fuse for coming on 3 years. So I started working with Mark Smargan, the CEO, back in July 2020, and it's been a fun ride since.
Awesome, thank you, Robert. Yeah, you've been a busy man. So, well, let's start to learn a little bit about Fuse then. The headline on the website just says "Unleash Web3 Superpowers." Fuse, which I'm not super familiar with, I must admit, but I can see, it's already a well built out blockchain. It says Fuse is an enterprise grade, use case agnostic, reliable, and secure, decentralized, EVM compatible public blockchain. So you said, yeah, you've been with Fuse 3 years. So, well, tell us a little bit about Fuse, maybe the origin story, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, awesome. I suppose it's important to understand the background behind Fuse because Mark Smargin, who's the CEO of Fuse, is his brainchild essentially. He came from Kolu. Kolu initially was focused on colored coins on the Bitcoin protocol. So
Oh
colored
yeah,
coins were so they were essentially early sort of ERC20 tokens on
yeah,
Bitcoin back in the day.
that's right.
Vitalik was involved in that project. Yoni Assia, who's CEO of eToro, was involved. So there was a team of people that were involved in working on this protocol. Kolu then went on. They faced a sort of a challenge in around, I think around 2015, yeah, around 15, 16, which was, do they continue to work on the Bitcoin protocol or do they go with this new thing, Ethereum, which seems like a platform which is much easier to build on, right? Much easier to build stuff on top of. And they went down the Ethereum route. Kolu at the time and still is was focused on building currencies for municipalities, right? So for cities, essentially, they built the Tel Aviv shekel, Tel Aviv is where Fuse is headquartered, Israel. There was the Liverpool pound. Liverpool is where I grew up as a teenager. And they also did the Bristol, I think it was the Brixton pound actually in London. So focused on, speaking to municipalities, speaking to cities and building local currencies, the idea being to incentivize people to buy locally. And then later on in the sort of the 2019 bear market, there was, let's say, a difference in sort of levels of conviction about the future of blockchain technology. Mark being, having much more conviction, and he decided to sort of to go down his own route and focus more, even go further down the sort of the blockchain rabbit hole, as it were, and launch Fuse. So it was in late 2019 that the chain was launched. It was one of the first EVM chains. It was the less sort of it wasn't so fashionable back then to be launching EVM chains. And his focus was really on the technology stack, basically, which has three layers to it. You've got of course the consensus layer, the bottom layer, as it were. The big thing that Mark focused on was the business layer, realizing that it's not easy for businesses and for anyone to just build on top of a blockchain. There's all kinds of middleware infrastructure needed to be able to build on a blockchain. So the big focus for Mark at the time, and still is, was the business layer, essentially. And then, of course, you need to have beautiful apps, right? You need to be able to build sort of beautiful experiences so that everyday people, and Fuse is focused on the mainstream, can use the technology. So that was Mark's focus at the time, and today our focus is still very much on a business focused audience.
Got it. And so, if your role then is VP of growth, tell us what that means in the context of what you do for Fuse, and B, where does your sort of level of technical expertise sit in terms of your work with Fuse?
Yeah, so I've been in tech for over 10 years now. I'm definitely not the tech guy, that's for sure. I'm definitely more on the business and marketing side of things. I've got a pretty good understanding of technology. I suppose one of the things that I've always brought to the technology space is trying to translate what's happening on the developer side of things to a more normal audience, as it were, a more mainstream audience. So that's where it's some of the value that I bring essentially to any technology company, is trying to translate some of the sort of complexities. My role is really about what's really motivated me since the beginning of Fuse is creating an ecosystem on top of a permissionless blockchain, which can, really begin to take on a life of its own back in late 2020, when we were just, getting started with pushing the ecosystem. Me and a guy called Isaac Rodgin, who was the business development director at the time and played a key role in getting the project off the ground. We fought and worked aggressively in order to really get partnerships, basically, in order to get people building with us, get other infrastructure players to come in and build with us, players like Pocket Network at the time, to come and work and build on the blockchain, and many others. And little by little, what starts to happen is the ecosystem starts to take on a life of its own. There's a little bit less push and a little bit more pull, more projects wanting to come in, believing in our vision, seeing the activity on the chain and wanting to build with us. So a big focus of mine has really been that kind of growth, building partnerships and talking about our story in order to build an ecosystem which can really take on a life of its own. That's my ultimate focus.
Very good. And I can see any EVM chains, there are validators on the network and something called power validators with Fuse. So who are the power validators and what role do they play in terms of, I suppose, the Fuse vision, Robert?
That's an important question. So we'll talk a bit more about the consensus mechanism in a second. Fuse works on a authority round. So the way it validates is essentially on the network, of which there are around 70 responsible for validating transactions on the network and also for keeping the network secure. Coming back to what we were saying earlier about the business layer, currently apps that are building on top of the blockchain access the blockchain itself through for the most part, as is the case with many blockchains, they access it through a centralized entity, a server, right, essentially, which gives them access to things like RPC nodes. It might give them access to indexing solutions, to other sorts of APIs. In Fuse's case, it gives them access to relay solutions, which relay various different types of transactions, essentially, in a way that improves the user experience. So we have that. We have the Fuse node infrastructure, essentially. Over time, as part of our vision of having a truly decentralized ecosystem, we'd like to decentralize the business layer, essentially. So the power validators are a new sort of validator that don't only validate everyday transactions on the network, but also provide access to those same things. So providing access to various different APIs, access to relaying software, access to indexing, etc. And as we as we move forward over the next few quarters, there'll be proposals coming out in order to understand how we incentivize these power validators to provide those services on the network. So it's essentially decentralizing the business layer on Fuse.
Yeah, so if that's the case, it sounds like those power validators would need to be companies or enterprises, reasonably big organizations. So I presume that that must be some part of the target audience for Fuse users. So I guess it's a roundabout way of saying, love to understand some of the different use cases that Fuse is trying to prioritize, maybe both, at kind of enterprise or business level, but secondly, also, I guess, consumer level.
Yeah, it's interesting actually to understand the different types of, players within an ecosystem. Talking about the validators, if you go to our staking app, if you go to staking.fuse.io, then you'll see in most cases you'll see the names of the various different institutions that are supporting Fuse. You'll see players like Tectona, for example, which is a leading digital asset trading firm in Israel. You'll see leading VCs like Collider, Spark, TRGC, etc. So you'll see that sort of institutional focus there. And then you go up essentially within the stack, and you start to look at the businesses that are actually the businesses that are actually providing those services so that mainstream users can use the technology. Our focus is really on SMBs, is really on small and medium-sized businesses, and the reason for that is, I think that anyone listening to this podcast right now would agree that money is being is and always has been reinvented over time. We're going through a bit of an acceleration phase right now. We've had some really interesting news happening in the past couple of years with the likes of Starbucks and Gucci doing deals with ApeCoin and things, Amazon launching a new marketplace over the next few months, like doing NFT based stuff. But what we feel is that SMBs are falling behind, and one of the reasons for that is because they don't have the same resources that Starbucks and Gucci, etc., have, who can throw down $10 million for a POC, essentially for a proof of concept on some new NFT project. So what we aim to do, and what we do is provide tools that make it easy and that aren't ultra costly, so that smaller businesses and startups can access the technology and the resources they need in order to be able to launch Web3 based payments, loyalty, NFTs, whatever it is they'd like to experiment with. So big focus on the long tail of business, essentially.
Yeah, of course, Robert, you'll be only well too aware that after, I suppose, the 2021, early 22, explosion of interest in Web3 following the really quite intense bull market in NFTs for a while, and of course the metaverse was huge for a while. But now in 2023, as we're in the depths, I guess, of another crypto winter. So interest in Web3, metaverse, NFTs, significantly down on where it was. How in that kind of environment, what sort of strategy do you use to keep attracting new users, new businesses, new use cases to the Fuse ecosystem, so you can kind of ride out the storm, I guess, until perhaps the market turns and you can emerge in as strong a possible condition?
Yeah, I would say I think it's really important for any Web3 project to have a really strong builder culture, right? So sort of developer focused culture, and a really strong I'm going to say bull culture, right? In a sense, I'd say one of the challenges with many projects out there is that they focus a little bit too much on the token price and on all the great things that can come with the bull market, and a little bit not enough essentially on tech. The same then leads into what does growth look like during a bear market? What does growth look like during a bull market? The key KPIs that we focus on at Fuse is, of course, ecosystem growth, and we do look at the number of general users coming into the ecosystem. We do look at the number of general users that are using DeFi on Fuse, that are using things like NFTs on Fuse, which I would say are more experienced crypto users. And then, of course, to what extent are we actually managing to get mainstream users, people like my sister, for example, who has a family and likes to come home at 7 p.m. and have a normal life and not be up at 3 a.m. trading NFTs like some of the crazy people that I know. We for us, it's really about looking at things like token holders and TVL, things like that during any time, but particularly during a bull market. Right now, the big focus for us is on operators, and operators are the businesses essentially that, which I can elaborate more on, the businesses that allow merchants and mainstream users to access this technology, allow them, for example, not to have to pay fees on the network. We've had hundreds of operators come into the network and test various different solutions. We currently have around 10 really solid projects, really solid operator projects that are building on the platform. Our focus this year in 2023 is to bring 100 operators on board. A huge pull approach there. To get more into the weeds on the marketing side of things, lots of content talking about the projects that are already building with us, and really showcasing those stories. And then also leveraging things like search to ensure that when people are searching, when smaller businesses are searching for things like Web3 payments, crypto payments, etc., they're able to find Fuse. And then it's really about, speaking to as many projects as possible, qualifying them, and experimenting, essentially.
Sounds good, Robert. Well, look, as we finish off this part of the podcast, I'd love to just hear, anything that's coming up on the roadmap for you guys, or what you're expecting in the latter part of 2023 across the Fuse ecosystem. And of course, also, tell people where they should go to learn about Fuse and look at getting involved, whether they're developers or enterprises or consumers or whatever else.
Yeah. There's a big focus right now on, we've talked a little bit about the business layer, coming back to the consensus layer. Fuse functions on it's an authority round Aura chain. It works very well and has worked very well. It's been an ultra stable, well-functioning chain. There's a question of standards, basically. As the space continues to develop, we're going to start seeing standards develop. And as part of that, one of the big proposals in the ecosystem right now is there's a couple of proposals when it comes to the consensus layer. Some consider that it could be interesting to look at the Cosmos ecosystem and look at that as a standard to build upon. Others consider a beacon chain, and beacon chains are essentially the new mechanism, right, for Ethereum 2.0 in terms of creating new blocks. So we're looking at those two proposals. The beacon chain is the one that is most prominent. As part of that, we'll be looking at new tokenomics. These are multi-year changes, right? They're not things that happen over the space of a few weeks or months. But that's something to watch, essentially, is how the consensus layer will develop on Fuse over the next, in terms of the proposals that come out and the engagement that we get from the community on those, positive or negative, over the next few months and quarters, and then how it develops going into 2024 in terms of actually migrating to a new consensus layer. And then, in terms of finding more information, news.fuse.io is our blog. You'll find updates there 3-4 times a week on the various different partnerships happening, whether it's new infrastructure plays coming in and building on Fuse, or new DeFi projects, new real world projects. Fuse.io. If you go to fuse.io, if you're a developer, you'll see a big button there that says Get Started. You can check out the SDK there, which allows you to get access to some of those APIs, the documentation and APIs, to start building on Fuse with a wallet focus in particular, to sort of create and manage wallets on Fuse in a way that's made for businesses. And then just generally check out our socials, check out the Fuse Twitter account. I'd say they're the 3 key channels to be watching, and then of course the Telegram channel to engage with the community.
Awesome. And of course, links will be in the show notes, listeners. But fuse.io is the website. It's a nice website, actually. Let's go to a very quick break, and then we'll come back. We'll have some fun. We'll run Robert through the very famous crypto conversation hot take round. Back in 1 second.
For crypto indices and benchmarking, Brave New Coin's powerful indexing engine can calculate high-frequency intraday and end-of-day indices for a wide range of index products. Brave New Coin's custom indices team delivers experienced consultancy, premium data, and trusted calculation. Contact BNC today to find out more.
All right, we are back, and I'm with Robert Miller, VP of Growth at Fuse. as we've heard, a business and consumer-friendly blockchain accelerating the mainstream adoption of Web3 apps and payments, all that good stuff. Robert, you may or may not be aware, but I like to finish each podcast with a quick round of rapid-fire crypto conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me, Robert. I'm just going to run some questions at you. Just want kind of quick, snappy, hot take style answers. No right or wrong way to do it. Question 1 for you, Robert. Where would you say you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
I'm more edging towards the multi-chain opportunist spectrum. I do understand Bitcoin maximalists, though. I think Bitcoin maximalists they must be smart enough to know that Bitcoin cannot be everything, just based on the technology, right? It's not made for lots of the amazing use cases that we've seen within the Ethereum ecosystem. I'd say I'm more of an Ethereum maxi, if anything, which is the Fuse being an EVM chain would make sense. Bitcoin maximalists are sort of gatekeepers, if you like, to, they ensure there's not too much nonsense. They're kind of the parents, right? They're the adults in the room. They ensure there's not too much complete nonsense taking place. But I think, most of them are smart enough to know that if it was just Bitcoin, we might not be here now, right? If anything, the rest of the stuff that's taking place has supported the growth of Bitcoin and vice versa.
Sure, I like it. Very well said. All right, Robert, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
That Ethereum is going to win.
Yeah, I like it. All right, well, Bill Gates famously said we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. So I suppose with that in mind, whatever you like, Web3, NFTs, metaverse, the Fuse ecosystems role in all of this, what does it start to look like in 10 years' time?
The Fuse ecosystem's role in all of this?
Yeah, whatever you like. Speculate away. What does Web3 look like in 10 years' time, or Fuse in 10 years' time?
I think it looks like, in 10 years' time, it looks like the banks disappearing, especially given what we're seeing right now. Everything that we're trying to do here is about, in any other industry, if there was an amazing technology which just made sense for it to move forward, maybe not in any industry, but I'm talking about the I'd say there's too many Luddites essentially in the space right now, or in the banking industry. Everything that we're trying to do essentially is about unshackling business, right, from an antiquated financial system. So that's that. I think in 10 years' time, it looks like the banking system disappearing and money and value moving on open source rails and open source rails only.
Very nicely said. All right, well, the flip side of that, of course, Robert, is a quote by William Gibson, who said that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. With that in mind, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
I'm not sure if people are aware of, the amount of infrastructure that's been built. Essentially, everyday people see price go up, price go back down again. They think that Bitcoin's dead. In 2008, there was a first ping, right? A first ping of a node on a first Bitcoin node, and then since then there's been pings happening every moment essentially, and slowly but surely there's been this amazing network of nodes wrapping itself around planet Earth, on the Bitcoin network, on the Ethereum network, on the Cosmos network, on other networks, and all this amounts to infrastructure which is designed to replace, as I said previously, technology which is antiquated. And I don't think that everyday people see that. They just see the price going up and down, and they think that that's all it amounts to. But if they could see what's really happening behind the scenes, all the hardware that's being put in place, and the way that hardware is being incentivized, then it might give them a different view on the future of this space, and it might help them understand where this space is really going.
Wonderfully said again, Robert. And it takes us nicely to the final question, which is, what is your favourite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
You're asking the wrong person. Science fiction. I'll tell you something. I'm definitely not into fantasy. I'm not a fan of fantasy at all. I want to be. I want to be more. I think it'd be good for my creativity to be more into fantasy.
You never even did Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones didn't do Game of Thrones.
No, especially not Game of Thrones. Especially, I did the first season, and then it was the end of the first season, and there's the beautiful naked a blonde woman there with the two dragons on her shoulder, and that's the point at which I said, I'm done with this. I don't understand what's happening anymore.
Yeah.
But perhaps I should open up my mind a little bit and be a little bit more creative and allow myself to enter into these parallel sort of universes.
You don't enjoy movies like The Matrix? Don't enjoy movies like The Matrix?
So I would no. However, the Matrix, yes, because there's
pure science fiction.
It feels more tangible to me. The Matrix feels more. I understand what's happening with the Matrix. I get it. So it's more tangible, and that is actually the movie that sprang to mind earlier when you asked about science fiction movies.
Yeah. All right. I like it. Very, very funny. Very good, Robert. We reached the end of the show. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Close us out again by shouting out the different Fuse websites, social media properties. Do you have a Twitter yourself? Take it away.
Yes. So Fuse.io for the website for developers. Click on Get Started and they'll get access to the SDK. Please check out the blog, news.fuse.io, and sign up for the newsletter to get informed about the latest goings on in the ecosystem. My personal Twitter, Rob_Miller87, and I do tweet regularly, so would love to engage with anybody there. Feel free to DM me, and happy to engage.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Robert. All the best, and bye for now.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, there you go. That was Robert from Fuse, a very nice guy. That was fun. Enjoyed chatting to Robert. Thank you for coming on the show, mate. Thank you to you, the listeners, for listening, especially if you're still listening here at the end of the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crypto Conversation in whatever podcast app you are using. But that is it for today. Thanks, team. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave, a new coin.